Welcome to or welcome back to the Tower Yoga podcast. If you've been following the last few episodes, then you would know we've been going through the teachings of the Yoga Sutras. So, of course, we started all the way with 1.1 and we've made it through 1.17, the teachings on the nature of the mind and the practices of steady effort and ease or gentle release. Today, we are, of course, continuing with the sutras. We will go through sutras 1.18 all the way through 1.22, which move into the deeper layers of meditation and the qualities that support them. Before we begin, I want to offer my continued acknowledgement. These teachings come from the Indian tradition of yoga, and I share them with deep respect for that lineage. I'm not a scholar, I'm a student, and I'm exploring how these teachings land in my own day to day, in my life practice, in my yoga practice. And I'm exploring how these feel and resonate from my own experience, my own understanding. And I'm hoping that by sharing this, that you might do the same thing and just, start to think about how these ancient teachings might support you in these modern times as well. Okay, so these sutras, 1.18 through 1.22, describe states of meditation known as Samadhi, moments when the mind becomes steady and deeply absorbed. Deeply absorbed. These sutras are not necessarily talking about deep absorption through meditation in like a really overly dramatic or mystical way per se, but as a natural quieting that arises from consistent practice over time. And I want to name this clearly, that Samadhi is not a goal. It's not something to chase. Patanjali, the one who compiled these teachings, presents it as a part of the map of meditation. So it's really a description and not an expectation per se. And I have heard teachers in the past on the sutras speak on like the promise of this teaching. And I can understand what they're saying, but I always almost kind of like cringe a little bit or recoil, if cringe isn't the right word, from that thing of like the promise, like the promise of something. Cause then it does feel like there's like, it's more of this like goal that I want to get to at the end of it. Like I want that promise. I want that thing on the other side. And it can sort of like take me out a little bit. But I think that's pretty much what they're speaking to, of like, there are things that you almost could expect if you keep showing up in like this type of way, but that turns into a trap really quickly. So I think looking at it as a description and a potential more than an expectation is probably a grounded and healthy way to go about it. So in Sutra 1.18, commentaries from, I've said in the first episode that I probably have like 6 different copies of different translations and commentaries on the Yoga Sutras. And the several commentaries describe the sutra as Nirvija Samadhi. So sometimes called seedless Samadhi. So, in simple terms, it refers to a state where even subtle thoughts begin to fade and the mind rests in quiet awareness. But the sutra emphasizes something really, really important. So, even in this deep quiet, our samskaras remain. Samskaras are the subtle impressions or patterns or grooves, the tendencies we carry. They're what's left from our experiences. It's if you can think about like rainfall, right? And then after like lots of big rains and the earth is, drying again, you can sort of see where those like pathways from the heavy rain was like kind of carving out a path. And you can almost think about the samskaras in that kind of way too. And something when I first learned about samskaras, I kind of thought about them for whatever reason as mostly like negative things. And I don't know if my teachers before weren't clear or if I just didn't have the awareness to kind of hear this or catch that. But it's not just by the like traumatic or like really intense or like negative things, although those do make really deep grooves. It's the positive things too. So some samskaras are just those subtle impressions. They're left over from all of the experiences we have, the conversations we have, the circumstances that we navigate through in life, all these kinds of things. So they're really what shape us. Well, they're what shape our reactions and our habits and like shape the familiar loops of the mind. And then those things, of course, shape us. So even when the surface of the mind becomes still, the deeper patterns are still there, only softened. And I don't know if this is like correct, but for me, I kind of think in the same way that our subconscious is like always there in the background. So even in our day to day, certain things might not necessarily be in our conscious awareness. We might not be consciously filtering what we're saying, doing, how we're reacting, and all these kinds of things through that. The subconscious, it's like it never turns off, not even in sleep. And kind of, I don't know, in sleep, sometimes it feels like it's actually a little bit more easily expressed. But yeah, so it's not the same thing, but just to sort of like liken it, I guess, to something else is like in the same way the subconscious never turns off, but it's not always clear and apparent that it's like running a big part of how you're operating. Samskaras work, I think, in a similar way, or it's how I understand it. So the Sutra 1.18, it's not the final state of liberation. And like, that's why it's a profound calm, but it's still within the realm, it's still within the territory of the conditioned mind. So this part, it really matters. This state isn't achieved through controlling the mind. It arises naturally through letting go, through softening effort, and straight up through trust, like trusting in the process of your life, of the rhythm of life itself. Sutra 1.19 starts to point out some more simple observances, I guess. There are human beings in yogic cosmology who come into life with a naturally steady mind. And for them, these deep states arise effortlessly. This is not for us to necessarily try to achieve or like compare ourselves to. It's not meant to elevate or discourage. It's simply acknowledging that spiritual conditions vary and everyone's path looks different. I think that sometimes we can get caught up in the story and even comparing ourselves to the symbols and to the energies and forces that inspire us and forget that the whole reason that we would even look to them in the first place is for inspiration and not to necessarily mimic and like parrot, but to take that inspiration and in a real, genuine way and apply that to how we can let that inspiration move us in our everyday life. And it's going to look uniquely different than the person next to us. And it's even going to look different than how that shows up in the enlightened being, in the deities, and in the ones who seem to just sort of grasp this kind of stuff effortlessly, like they were like born with that wisdom. So I guess that's not a simple observance. It's more profound, I guess, like the deeper I talk about it, but it is that there are human beings and we all come into life with a different makeup, a different kind of blueprint, and that there are beings which seem to be ones that we look to for inspirations that we might follow, that we might want to emulate in certain ways. But also, it's like we're also here to be who we are. And how can we let those ones be ways in which we feel like we can take that inspiration on and move in a unique and authentic way. Okay, I digress. 1.20. So this is like continuing to speak for the rest of us, which is almost every single person who exists. The path develops through certain supportive qualities. So this is for the one who isn't born as an enlightened being, who is just your everyday person like me, like you. So there is Shraddha, and Shraddha is faith, a quiet trust that practice matters. There's Virya, energy or courage, the willingness to keep practicing even through seasons of doubt. There's Smriti, memory, remembering what steadiness feels like even when it's not accessible. Even if we are like in the middle of stormy weather, remembering that we have known steadiness, that we practice steadiness, that we can still have that access to that quiet place within, even if that access isn't available on the outside. And then there's the Samadhi, absorption, moments of genuine presence and settled attention. It's when you're settled down and you're settled in. There's Prajna, wisdom, the insight that grows from showing up again and again. These are not steps. This isn't a ladder. They're companions along the journey, and the journey's windy. They're qualities that arise and support one another as practice deepens. Sutras 1.21 and 1.22. These sutras tell us something simple yet profound. The fruits of practice match the sincerity of practice. And notice that isn't necessarily like the consistency per se, right? It's the sincerity, because I think the consistency without sincerity, there starts to be something there that lacks. So it's not intensity in a forceful sense. It's not perfection or discipline as pressure, but sincerity. It's a heartfelt willingness to stay engaged, and not just when it's convenient, not just when it's easy. Patanjali says that more quickly by those who practice with wholeheartedness. And I don't think that quickly necessarily equals like speed. I don't think that that is a guarantee that like, okay, well, if you like practice all the time, like wholeheartedly, like, like this steadiness is like just going to be something that's like here and available for you, like in an immediate kind of way. But I think it means more, it's speaking more to like the idea, I think, of clarity. Right. And so when we show up fully, the path feels more stable. We have more of a clarity on like where to go and where to turn and like to speed up or to slow down. And I think when we can see clearly, like even think about trying to like navigate through any kind of pathway in like the dark, right? I think that it's a little bit harder and you're going to stumble and like maybe trip over something that you don't see. But this wholeheartedness, showing up wholeheartedly and you like over this period of time, there's this light that starts to develop that could be equivalent to the clarity I'm speaking of. And then that light allows you to move more freely through the path because it's illuminated. And so, yeah, it's so interesting because I've been studying these sutras, and I think that having to read so many different translations and over so many different years, the reason why it's not easy to stick is not because like I don't have an ability to learn and absorb and like retain things, but there's so much nuance and it's so complex. And so there's all these different ways in which I'm like picking up a translation. I'm saying, cool, like that seems like that's a little bit of a fast track in order to like get here to that. But then it's like, oh, but actually quickly doesn't mean this. But it means more like that. And there's all this sort of like metaphor and there's all this like gray area. So thanks for hanging in there with me. It's fun, actually. This kind of stuff is fun. It's a little bit, I feel a little bit more like rambly in today's episode, and I think that's okay. I'm just showing up as who I am today. But I don't think that was always a bad thing. These are fun things for me to chew on and to kind of think about. And I hope that you find that to be true for yourself too. That this doesn't have to be like, you don't have to show up to this and be studying it in this way where I do think that I have respect for the teachings, but in such a like serious way that it feels like frustrating, like, ooh, like, I can't understand this trigonometry math equation. That can be kind of frustrating. That can be fun for some people who are like, I choose to study this. I like this. I'm like choosing, right, to study these things. And so in that way, it can be really, really fun. Okay, let's keep going. All right. So let me take us all the way back to Sutras 1-1. And I want to mention that I think that this is one of the most compassionate teachings in the whole text, that you don't need to master anything. You just need to keep showing up. Sometimes mastery or like, great cultivation does happen as a byproduct or result of showing up. But again, this idea of like that being a promise, who knows? Who knows? But I think in the day to day, if showing up to your practice helps you, if it gives you some direction, and if it allows you to like orient in the world and gives you good ways to self reflect and kind of like organize yourself and how you go about life, then you're getting a gift every single day. And you might miss that, the little gift every single day, if you're like focused on that promise of like mastery at the end of things, like it's very much like the process has these little gifts along the way. And that's in and of itself like worth it to practice this wholeheartedly. And it's just cool to know, like potentially through a series of, showing up again and again, there could be some really, really awesome ways in which that allows you to experience life later. Okay, integrating the teachings. These sutras map the deeper landscape of meditation, but they're not asking us to reach for extraordinary states. They're not pointing us towards like some big, like Maha truth per se. Quiet comes from softening. Clarity comes from showing up and returning again and again. Wisdom grows quietly over time. Patterns loosen, not through force, but through presence. Awareness itself is a lot of the work of loosening up those old grooves, in like modern talk and speak. I hear a lot of people talk about it as like, the like neural pathways, right? And once we become aware of some of those grooves, then we can cultivate opposite thoughts or just different thoughts and start to nurture those other grooves. And so it's like those deep ones, it's not like they disappear per se, but they do. Well, I don't know. They do. They kind of dissolve by the more focus being on the newer grooves. And those subtle impressions can become even more subtle and we can make new impressions. And yeah, the like neuroplasticities kind of seems, I guess, like it hardens over time, but it's never too late to become aware of a pattern. And if it's a pattern that's like not helpful and it's harmful to you in any way, then there is a way to cultivate something different. Samadhi isn't a trophy. It's a moment when the mind remembers its own stillness. And this can show up seriously in daily life. It's kind of a hot take because some people are like, you can never experience it in this lifetime. If you do, then you can like never live a normal life again. Like you have to elevate to this other status and like dedicate your whole life to living in a cave or what have you. But really, like this can show up in small ways, is my perception, is my understanding that when you stop trying to control the situation and suddenly see it clearly, that is a micro samadhi moment. When a deep breath changes your whole internal landscape, that is a micro samadhi moment. When a problem softens, once you stop like wrestling with it and ruminating on it, when presence, even for a moment, feels like relief, that's a micro samadhi moment. When your old patterns show up, but you notice them, and even just like half a second earlier, so it goes from like, oh, in retrospect to now like almost in the moment, that might even be able to be considered a little micro moment of samadhi. They're just everyday expressions of the same qualities that I believe Patanjali is pointing to. They're small dissolvings of samskaras, small tastes of steadiness on the mat. Ease is more transformative than effort a lot of times. Letting yourself be imperfect is part of the work. Steadiness grows one breath at a time. Sometimes the try softer reveals more to us than the push harder one. Not always. I'm down for a little push. I'm down for not a lot of, well, maybe I'm down for some tension, and for some try hard. But the try softer is really, really, really important too. In meditation, if we can let thoughts come and go rather than fixating on anyone, and notice without gripping. If we can let the breath, settle us, and if we can trust that quiet that emerges in its own time, then that might even be like our own micro moments of samadhi. These are the beginnings, the everyday accessible kind that anyone can feel. So Sutras 1.18 through 1.22 remind us that the path of yoga, it is not a ladder to climb. It's a relationship with your own mind, one that deepens through trust and sincerity and a good dose of softness. You don't have to reach an advanced state. You don't have to understand every single term. You don't have to meditate perfectly. You just have to keep showing up and returning to your practice. Thank you so much for being here and practicing alongside me. It was a little bit more long-winded today. Thanks for hanging there in there with me. This will be episode 50, and it will conclude this current season. When we come back in a couple of weeks, we'll do so with maybe some more interviews, some other topics. We're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, but we will definitely jump back into this Sutras series sooner than later. So don't fret if you have been enjoying the series so far. Until next time, I hope that you have a lot to take with you and reflect on. And if you see me around, let me know. Let me know how this landed. You can also share in the comments. Okay. Thank you so much.